Shabbat. That's how God judges. That's what God's about. God is not about splitting you off and throwing you away, burning you up and using you up and saying, oh, well, that one failed, kind of like a potter. You know? That's not God. God's sense of justice is always seeking to bring you back into the fabric of shalom. Doesn't that look different? You know, it's like that fear we fear that we don't want to expose ourselves to God for fear we'll get fried. Well, it's just not true. Not according to the scriptures anyway. Does that ring true for you that when things are exposed, somehow the work of God happens to you and things begin to develop and change and you grow? Well, it sort of happened to Mr. Darcy, too. Mr. Darcy, you see, began to surprise himself and fall in love with Elizabeth. Elizabeth had a certain kind of fire in her, wouldn't you say, those of you who know her? She had a kind of fire and a beauty, a life-giving force that was just too attractive for him to take. And so finally he went to her and he asked her to marry him. Now, you understand she's a relatively poor young woman, and he's a really, really, really rich guy. And yet, here's what she says to his proposal. From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others, were such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike, and I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world for whom I would ever be prevailed upon to marry. Talk about judgment. Crushed. Exposed. Exposed for who he was. A man incomplete. A man not living up to that standard. It changed him. It changed him and it moved him. And the novel starts to shift, and Darcy begins, he looks at the world in much the same way. He understands what the relationships are among people. But he takes some actions in an effort to change the way he's done things, to make sure that he is a part of the weaving together of the fabric of society. See, Mr. Wickham had taken advantage of Elizabeth's younger sister. And so Mr. Darcy took it upon himself to do something about that situation. Mr. Darcy had discouraged his friend Bingley from being with Elizabeth's other sister. He did something about that situation. Mr. Darcy began to shift and change because he was judged. His life laid bare, that deep secret exposed. Elizabeth then began to shift as well. I think I've read you this, but I'm going to read it again. She goes to Darcy's estate. He's just visiting with her aunt and uncle. She doesn't even think he's going to be there. But here's what happened. Elizabeth, as they drove along, watched for the first appearance of Pemberley Woods with some perturbation. And when at length they turned in at the lodge, her spirits were in high flutter. The park was very large and contained a great variety of grounds. They entered in one of the lowest points and drove for some time through the beautiful woods stretching over a wide extent. Elizabeth's mind was too full of conversation, but she saw and admired every remarkable spot and point of view. They gradually ascended for half a mile and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence where the wood had ceased and the eye was instantly caught by Pemberley House. It was situated on the opposite side of the valley into which the road with some abruptness was wound. It was a large, handsome stone building, standing well on rising ground and backed by the ridge of high woody hills, and in front a stream of some natural importance was swelled into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. They were all of them warm in their admiration, and at that moment, she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley might be something. She saw on the estate the beauty that comes when somebody, instead of living out of pride, lives out of a desire to make things whole. Instead of trying to force the world into particular categories, it instead enhances the natural beauty, sees through the eyes of God so that things become more beautiful and whole. That's how Mr. Darcy had changed. They did eventually get together, you'll be delighted to know. The relation was in fact healed. Through the judgment came great beauty and healing. And that's how it works in God's world. Now the question is, what do you and I do about that? I use Mr. Darcy in this sermon because, of course, to use any examples of real live individuals would be unthinkable. I'm talking about things that run very deep in the human heart. Things we don't expose, and I don't do it often. But it's those things that need to see the light. It's those things that we confess, that we bring to the presence of God, because when we do it, we find out and we sense that enormous strength, power of God to take in even that and change even that into beautiful creation. I'm not sure how you want to go about that process. You know, it used to be that we did confess to priests. Now pretty much we do that with psychiatrists. And that's okay, except that they don't have that word of grace that comes back. They don't have that word of grace that says you cannot escape the loving arms of God. No matter the secret, no matter the hurt. It is amazing to me how easy it is for us to fall into an image of God as the one who will judge, rent us asunder, divide us from the world that we love. So what do we say of the text? Don't judge, don't divide. For each of us does carry that log in our eye, that piece of shame. There is level ground beneath the cross, and we look at one another on that level ground, recognizing we are the same. We work to remove the log from our eye so that we can see clearly and make judgments about the people around us. Not with an eye towards dividing them, judging them, and casting them off, but rather with an eye towards helping them find the way back into the arms of God. That's what happened with Darcy. That's what happens to all of God's people when they open their hearts to God. And the union does come like it did for Elizabeth and for Darcy. And you thought it was all about some girls who wanted to get married.